The day William Mercer bought a jail for $6, most of the town decided grief had finally taken the last solid piece of him. They whispered it beneath black umbrellas in the parking lot of the county administration building. They said it behind gloved hands and truck doors left half open against the rain. They said it with the kind of pity that sounds almost polite until it reaches your back. Poor William. He used to be somebody. Now look at him. William heard every word. He just did not turn around. At 71, he had lived long enough to understand that people were brave with opinions when they believed a man had nothing left to defend. His silver hair was tucked under a faded navy cap. His coat was old, the cuffs worn shiny from years of use, and beneath the collar, when the wind shifted just right, you could see the edge of a faded tattoo shaped like a German shepherd's head. Beside him sat Ghost. The big sable German shepherd was still as stone, his amber eyes watching the small crowd, as if every laugh, every whisper, every shifting footstep had meaning. Ghost was not young anymore. Gray dusted his muzzle, and one ear carried a small notch from a bad night in Kandahar long before either of them had reached Montana. But he was still powerful, still steady, and to William, still the only living soul who had never once looked at him like he was ruined. And before this story goes any further, take a second and tell me in the comments where you are watching from today. More importantly, tell me this. Do you believe a loyal dog can sense the truth before people are ready to face it? If stories about loyalty, second chances, and forgotten lives finding meaning again speak to you, subscribe to the channel and stay with us until the end. Because what William and Ghost were about to uncover inside that abandoned jail would prove that sometimes the world does not bury the truth forever. Sometimes it simply waits for the right soul to come looking. The auction had already lasted longer than anyone expected, which was to say almost 12 minutes. Most of the properties had gone cheap. A narrow lot behind the feed store, a condemned duplex near the old highway, 3 acres of flood-prone pasture nobody wanted badly enough to fight over. People had come because small towns rarely offered new entertainment, especially on a wet Thursday afternoon in early spring. Then the auctioneer reached the final item. He cleared his throat, glanced at the page as if hoping he had read it wrong, and said, Parcel 18C, former county jail structure and surrounding grounds. Located off Old Rail Spur Road, approximately 5 miles east of town. Property sold as is, with no warranty, no utility guarantee, and no county responsibility for demolition, remediation, or repair. A few people chuckled. Everyone knew that place. The jail had been built in the 1930s, closed sometime in the late 70s, and left to rot beside an abandoned rail line where wind dragged prairie dust through busted windows. Teenagers dared each other to sneak inside on Halloween. Hunters used the access road to turn around. Older residents passed by without looking too closely, as if the building itself remembered things they preferred to leave buried. The auctioneer raised his voice over the ring. Opening bid is $6. Silence settled over the lot. No hand rose. No one even pretended to think about it. A man near the front muttered, "County should pay somebody to take it." Another said, "You buy that, you buy a lawsuit and a tetanus shot." The auctioneer waited, bored already. Any interest? William looked down at Ghost. The dog did not move, but his ears lifted. For reasons William could not explain, he thought of the nights he had slept in his pickup with the heater running just long enough to keep his fingers from going numb. He thought of his daughter in Phoenix letting his calls go to voicemail. He thought of his son in Ohio saying, "Dad, I just can't get involved in your mess right now." As if losing a pension dispute, a house, and a wife to cancer in the same terrible stretch of life had been some kind of hobby William had chosen. He thought of every door that had closed. Then he heard his own voice. $6. The crowd turned. The auctioneer blinked. "Did you say $6, Mr. Mercer?" William nodded once. A laugh moved through the group, small but sharp. The auctioneer scanned the faces in front of him. Any higher bids? No one spoke. Rain ticked against umbrellas and pickup roofs. Going once. Going twice. He gave William a look that seemed to ask whether he was sure. William did not change his expression. The gavel came down. Sold. And just like that, for less than the price of a diner breakfast, William Mercer became the owner of an abandoned jail that everyone else believed was worthless. As the crowd broke apart, comments followed him across the parking lot. That old man finally lost it. Nobody wants that place for a reason. What is he going to do? Move into a cell. William unlocked his aging Ford pickup without answering. Ghost climbed into the passenger seat with the careful dignity of a soldier taking his position. William settled behind the wheel and sat there for a moment while rain slid down the windshield in crooked lines. He should have felt foolish. Instead, he felt something dangerously close to relief. "Well, partner," he said quietly, "looks like we own a jail." Ghost turned his head and gave him one steady look. William laughed before he could stop himself. The sound surprised him. It came out rough and rusty, like a gate opening after years of neglect. He could not remember the last time he had laughed without forcing it. The drive to the jail took him out of town, past the courthouse, past the closed lumber yard, past a row of warehouses that had once promised jobs and now offered only broken windows and fading signs. The road narrowed after the last gas station. Montana opened around him in rolling stretches of brown grass, wet sage, cottonwoods, and low gray sky. Old Railspur Road appeared exactly where the county map said it would, though barely. Gravel gave way to ruts. Weeds brushed the underside of the truck. The abandoned rail line ran parallel for half a mile, its rusted tracks half swallowed by grass. Then the jail rose ahead of them. It was uglier than William remembered. The building sat low and square against the prairie, made of stained concrete block and brick darkened by decades of storms. Rust streaked the bars. Half the windows were boarded. A chain-link fence leaned outward in places, defeated by time and weather. The old sign near the gate had lost most of its lettering, but William could still make out County Detention Annex beneath flakes of peeling paint. He parked under a cottonwood and cut the engine. For a few seconds, the only sound was the tick of cooling metal and rainwater dripping from branches. Ghost stood in the passenger seat before William touched the door handle. That caught his attention. During their years together, William had learned the difference between a dog noticing something and a dog knowing something. Ghost was not restless. He was not excited. He was focused. His ears tilted toward the main cell block. His nose worked the damp air. His body leaned forward with quiet purpose. "What is it?" William asked. Ghost did not bark. He only stared. The old jail looked back with broken windows dark as empty eyes. William stepped out, every joint reminding him of the rain. He opened Ghost's door, and the shepherd jumped down, landing lightly despite his age. Together they crossed the muddy yard toward the entrance. The air smelled of wet grass, iron, and old concrete. The outer gate resisted until William put his shoulder into it. Metal screamed against metal. Somewhere inside the building, water dripped steadily into unseen puddles. Ghost stopped at the threshold. William did too. He had entered buildings in worse shape and under worse circumstances. He had walked into houses rigged with tripwires. He had moved through streets where every window might hide someone watching. But this was different. This place did not feel dangerous exactly. It felt like it had been waiting. Ghost stepped forward first. Not toward the yard. Not back toward the truck. Straight into the jail. William followed. The door groaned behind them, and the sound rolled through the corridor like a memory refusing to die. Inside, the air was cooler. Dust softened every surface. Faded paint peeled from the walls in long strips, and water stains spread across the ceiling like old bruises. Rusted cell doors lined both sides of the main corridor. Some hung open. Others remained locked. A booking desk sat near the entrance beneath a calendar from a year William had tried hard to forget. He swept his flashlight across the floor. That was when the first detail found him. Most of the dust lay thick and undisturbed, but a narrow path through the center corridor looked different. Not clean, just less abandoned. Someone had moved through here within the last few months, maybe weeks. Carefully, too. Not teenagers running around for a dare. Not vandals looking for copper wire. "Somebody's been here," William murmured. Ghost kept moving. The shepherd passed the first row of cells, then the second, his paws clicking softly against concrete. Every few steps he paused and listened. William followed with the flashlight in one hand and an old tire iron in the other, not because he expected trouble, but because age had not made him careless. At the far end of the block, Ghost stopped outside a cell with the number 13 painted above the bars. William noticed the hinges first. They were old, but not as old as the others. The rust pattern did not match. The screws had been replaced at some point, then deliberately dirted or left to age. The door stood open just enough for a man to slip through sideways. William pushed it wider. Inside was a narrow cot bolted to one wall, a small barred window, and a concrete floor cracked in several places. It looked like every other cell, except Ghost did not treat it like every other cell. He walked to the back wall, lowered his nose, and sniffed along the base as if following a scent trapped under stone. William crouched beside him. At first, the floor appeared ordinary. Then his flashlight caught faint scratches in the concrete, lines too straight to be natural. They formed a rectangle roughly 6 feet long and 4 feet wide. Near one corner, grime concealed a metal ring set almost flush with the floor. William brushed dirt away with his thumb. The ring was real. He hooked 2 fingers through it and pulled. Nothing happened. He pulled harder. Still nothing. The concrete did not move, but it gave back a hollow sound when he tapped it with the tire iron. Ghost sat down. William looked at him. You knew? The dog blinked once. Evening. Pressed against the broken windows, and common sense told William not to keep prying around in an abandoned jail after dark with no phone signal and no one expecting him home. That last part stung more than he wanted it to. No one was expecting him anywhere. He stood slowly. Tomorrow, he said. Ghost did not look convinced. William unrolled his sleeping bag near the old booking desk, because the jail might have been ugly, cold, and possibly unsafe, but it was dry. And dry mattered when a man had spent months living between motel rooms, his truck, and favors that always came with expiration dates. He ate crackers and canned soup heated on a small camp stove. Ghost ate from a dented metal bowl and then positioned himself facing the cell block. That was unusual. Most nights, Ghost slept with one ear open, but his body relaxed. Tonight he stayed upright, watching the dark corridor as moonlight slipped through broken windows. William tried to sleep. The building talked around him. Wind pushed through gaps. Metal ticked as the temperature dropped. Water fell drop by drop somewhere beyond the cells. He drifted between dreams and the thin alertness that had followed him home from war and never fully left. Sometime after midnight, Ghost stood. William's eyes opened at once. The dog faced the far corridor. William held still and listened. At first, there was only wind. Then came a faint metallic sound. One click. A scrape. Silence. William sat up slowly, grabbed the flashlight, and slipped his boots on. Ghost moved ahead without waiting. The beam of light cut through the darkness as they passed empty cells, old bars, and shadows that seemed to lean toward them. When they reached cell 13, William stopped. The door was closed. Completely closed. He knew it had been open. He had left it open on purpose. Ghost stood beside him, silent and tense. William wrapped his hand around the handle. The metal was cold enough to bite. He pulled. The hinges groaned, and the door swung inward. The cell looked unchanged. Except near the back wall, a thin crescent of fresh dust had shifted beside the hidden rectangle. William knelt and tapped the floor again. This time the hollow sound answered more clearly. All right, he whispered. Let's see what you are hiding. He worked the tire iron under the edge where the metal ring met concrete. The first movement came so suddenly he almost lost his balance. A slab lifted, scraping against the floor with a low, grinding moan that echoed through the cell block. Cool air rose from below. Not stale air. Preserved air. A narrow staircase descended into darkness. William aimed the flashlight down. Wooden steps, old but intact, vanished beneath the jail. Ghost looked at him, then stepped onto the first stair. Of course, William muttered. Why would we do anything sensible? They descended slowly. The stairs ended in a room reinforced by old timber beams. The air smelled of cedar, paper, dust, and age. Shelves lined the walls. Wooden crates sat in careful rows. Filing cabinets occupied one side. A desk stood in the center beneath a hanging lamp that no longer worked. William stood there without speaking. This was no teenager's hideout. This was an archive. Boxes of documents. Ledgers. Photographs. Maps sealed in tubes. Not junk left behind by the county, but records deliberately protected from water, weather, and curious hands. Ghost walked to the desk and stopped. A leather journal rested on top, exactly where someone might leave it for the next person brave or foolish enough to find the room. William opened it carefully. On the first page, in handwriting made shaky by age or fear, were 8 words. If you found this, they never stopped searching. William read the sentence twice. Then he heard an engine outside. His body reacted before his mind finished understanding. He snapped off the flashlight, reached down, and touched Ghost lightly behind the shoulder. The shepherd lowered himself without a sound. The engine grew louder, then stopped somewhere near the jail. William did not breathe. A door opened, closed. Footsteps entered the building above them. Slow footsteps. Not kids. Not homeless men looking for shelter. Someone moved through the jail with purpose. Dust sifted down from the ceiling as boards creaked overhead. The footsteps paused near the cell block. A metal door shifted. Then another sound came, so quiet William almost doubted it. Someone was listening. Ghost pressed close beside him, calm but ready. William tightened his grip on the journal. He had not held a weapon in years, not a real one. But his body remembered danger. More importantly, it remembered patience. The footsteps eventually moved away. Minutes later, the engine started again and faded down the access road. Only after the silence had settled fully did William turn the flashlight back on. The room looked the same. He did not. The jail was not simply abandoned. Someone still cared about it. Someone cared enough to come at night and check it. William sat at the desk and began reading. The journal belonged to a man named Harold Finch, a county clerk who had served for more than 20 years. The early entries were dry, almost boring. References to storage inventories, land surveys, court filings, municipal archives. But as the years moved forward, the tone changed. Harold began documenting discrepancies in county records connected to land near the river east of town. Property boundaries shifted. Survey maps disappeared. Copies no longer matched originals. Public land meant for a recreation project was reclassified, transferred, divided, and eventually sold into private hands through paperwork that looked legal only when seen one document at a time. One name appeared again and again. Victor Langford. William knew the name. Everyone did. Langford owned warehouses, rail lots, commercial property, and more land around town than most people could map. He donated to school fundraisers. He sat in the front row at ribbon cuttings. His family name appeared on plaques, benches, and the new wing of the medical clinic. People admired him in public. In private, some lowered their voices before saying his name. William kept reading until dawn stained the cracks in the ceiling pale gray. The journal did not accuse with drama. It recorded with precision. Dates, meetings, signatures, parcel numbers, names of families who had donated land for a river park that was supposed to include ball fields, picnic areas, walking trails, and a public boat launch. According to Harold Finch, that project had not simply failed. It had been slowly redirected until the town forgot what it had been promised. Ghost wandered to a row of filing cabinets and nudged one with his nose. William looked up. You found something else? The dog stared at the cabinet. A brass tag on the front read Municipal Records. The lock was rusted almost beyond recognition. William worked it with the tire iron until it snapped. The drawer opened with a scrape that made him wince. Inside were folders arranged by year. Original surveys, meeting minutes, donation agreements, land transfer records, documents that should have been in the courthouse archive, not hidden under a jail cell. William pulled a folder marked East River Recreation Project and spread the contents across the desk. Maps showed public land stretching along the riverbank. Handwritten notes described donations from local families, church groups, and small businesses. A preliminary design showed picnic shelters, 2 baseball diamonds, a playground, and a memorial grove for veterans. William stared at that last detail longer than the others. A veterans' memorial grove, the kind of place where families might bring flowers, where children might learn that service had names and faces, where old soldiers might sit under trees and feel less forgotten. Instead, the land had vanished into paperwork. By sunrise, William understood enough to be afraid. Not for himself. That had become a small concern over the years. He was afraid because truth had weight, and once lifted, it could fall on people who had spent decades building comfortable lives on top of it. He carried several folders upstairs, sealed the hidden entrance as best he could, and stepped outside with Ghost into a cold, clean morning. Fog drifted across the prairie. The jail behind him looked the same as it had the day before, but William knew better now. Nothing was the same. By noon, he drove into town. The diner on Main Street had not changed much since his wife, Ellen, was alive. Same red vinyl booths. Same bell over the door. Same smell of coffee, bacon grease, and pie crust. Conversation dipped when William entered with Ghost at his side. A waitress named Marcy looked him up. and down. You surviving out there? So far. You really staying in that jail? For now. Marcy poured coffee without asking. Then you need eggs. William almost smiled. I need answers more. That quieted her. He took a corner booth, and Ghost settled beneath the table. A few minutes later, an elderly woman approached with a cup of tea in both hands. Her white hair was pinned neatly, her coat buttoned to her throat. William recognized her vaguely from the auction. You're William Mercer, she said. Yes, ma'am. Clara Whitcomb. She nodded toward the empty seat. My husband worked at that jail before it closed. Deputy sheriff. Nights mostly. William gestured to the chair. Please. Clara sat, her eyes moving briefly to the folder beside him. People laughed when you bought it. They did. They laughed when my husband said something was wrong out there, too. William's hand stilled around his coffee cup. For the next hour, Clara talked. Not quickly, not dramatically. She spoke like a woman opening drawers she had kept shut for years. Her husband, Ray, had noticed county boxes moved in and out of the jail after it was supposedly no longer used for regular detention. He had seen officials arrive late at night. He had heard arguments in the record room. Once, he had come home with a split lip and told her he slipped on wet stairs, though she never believed him. He died in '98, Clara said. Heart attack. But before that, he told me. Clara, that old jail knows more than the courthouse ever will. I thought he was being poetic. Ray wasn't usually poetic. William did not tell her what he had found. Not yet. He only listened. When Clara rose to leave, she touched the folder with 2 fingers. If you found something, she said softly, be careful who you trust. This town learned to be quiet for a reason. Outside the diner, Ghost stopped on the sidewalk. Across the street, beside the courthouse, a black SUV idled at the curb. Polished. Expensive. Dark windows. William did not need a photograph to know what kind of message it was. The SUV rolled away before he could cross the street. That night, back at the jail, he spread documents across the booking desk while lantern light flickered over the old walls. Wind rattled the bars. Ghost lay nearby, his head resting on his paws, eyes open. William compared dates until his vision blurred. The river project had begun as a promise after a flood damaged several neighborhoods along the East Bank. Families donated land. The county applied for state support. Local businesses pledged materials. But before construction began, a new survey reclassified portions of the riverfront as unstable, low value, and unsuitable for public use. Soon after, those parcels were transferred through shell companies and quiet partnerships. Years later, the same land became valuable when the rail spur expansion was announced. Langford was not listed as the first buyer. He was almost never listed first. But he appeared nearby, a signature on an advisory memo, a financing partner, a beneficiary of a later merger. Always adjacent. Always clean. That is how they did it, Williams said. Ghost lifted his head. They stayed one room away from the dirty work. A vehicle passed outside near the access road, headlights sliding briefly across the broken windows. William turned off the lantern. The vehicle slowed, stopped, then moved on. The jail was being watched. The next morning, fog rolled across the prairie so thick the buildings seemed to float in it. William stood on the front step with coffee cooling in his hands while Ghost scanned the road. He considered calling the sheriff. Then he remembered that the current sheriff had won his last campaign with a large donation from Langford Development. He considered calling his daughter. Then he imagined explaining that he had bought a jail, found hidden land records beneath it, and believed a powerful local family might still be protecting a decades-old fraud. She would ask whether he was taking his medication. He was not on medication, but that would not matter. So he did the one thing life had taught him still worked. He kept digging. Ghost led him to the evidence storage room shortly after breakfast. It sat behind the old booking area, a narrow room lined with metal shelves and the smell of mildew. Most of the shelves were empty, though a few held. Broken chairs, rotting cardboard boxes, and a cracked plastic sign that read "Authorized Personnel Only." Ghost ignored everything visible. He went straight to the far corner and stared at a dented metal cabinet. William sighed. You are starting to make me feel useless. The dog remained serious. William dragged the cabinet aside with a scream of metal against concrete. Dust burst into the air. Beneath it lay a square hatch set into the floor. Unlike the hidden entrance in cell 13, this one had been designed for speed. The old lock broke with little resistance. A short ladder descended into a small vault below. Ghost went first. Naturally, William said and followed. The vault was no bigger than a walk-in closet. Most shelves were bare, but a steel lockbox sat on a table in the center. It had no label, no official markings, just dust and a corroded latch. Inside were photographs, cassette tapes, and a sealed envelope. For whoever finally finds the truth. William opened the envelope with hands steadier than he felt. The letter was from Harold Finch. It explained that he and two others had hidden evidence in stages after realizing the official archive had been compromised. The underground room beneath the cell contained documents that could prove what changed. The smaller vault contained proof of who knew. William picked up the photographs. Community meetings. County offices. Men shaking hands beside survey maps. A younger Victor Langford smiling near the front of a room full of folding chairs and hopeful faces. On the backs of the photos, Harold had written names, dates, and notes. Then William saw the cassette labeled Final Statement. He carried it upstairs as if it were fragile enough to break from breath alone. The old recorder from the archive chamber took 3 tries and 2 fresh batteries from William's emergency kit. When the tape finally turned, static filled the booking room. Then a man's voice emerged. "My name is Harold Finch. If you are hearing this, then I was right to hide these records." William leaned forward. Ghost sat beside him, still as a statue. Harold's voice was older, tired, but clear. He explained his work as county clerk. He described the first discrepancies as if filing a report, not telling a ghost story. Parcel numbers, missing surveys, revised maps, donation agreements separated from their supporting records. He admitted that at first he thought the mistakes were accidental. Then he found the originals. The people responsible were careful, Harold said through the static. They did not steal in the way common thieves steal. They redirected. They adjusted. They waited for people to get tired, confused, embarrassed, or old. They counted on paperwork being more frightening to ordinary families than a locked door. William closed his eyes. He had seen men do terrible things with rifles. He had also seen men do terrible things with pens. The second kind often slept better. Harold continued. He never shouted. He never begged. He named meetings, signatures, corporate transfers, and county votes. He described how the East River Recreation Project had been starved of funding after its most valuable land was reclassified. He explained that families who donated property were told the project failed because costs rose and public interest faded. In truth, the land had been moved, sliced, and hidden inside a chain of transactions that eventually enriched private developers. Then came the part that made William's chest tighten. The town lost more than land, Harold said. It lost a place where people were supposed to gather. It lost the memorial grove promised to veterans. It lost ball fields children never played on, picnic tables families never sat at, trees never planted, and memories never made. Theft is not always measured in dollars. Sometimes it is measured in empty Saturdays. The tape crackled. Harold coughed. If the originals survive, the truth can survive. I do not know whether anyone will care by the time these words are heard. I only know people deserve the truth, even when it arrives too late to change the past. The recording ended in static. William sat motionless. For the first time since he bought the jail, the silence did not feel empty. It felt full of voices that had been waiting for someone to listen. He knew better than to march into the courthouse waving papers. Evidence mishandled becomes rumor. Rumor becomes entertainment. Entertainment becomes yesterday's gossip. Harold Finch had protected the truth for 40 years. William would not ruin it in 40 minutes. He spent the next week working like a man preparing for a mission. He photographed every document in place before moving it. He cataloged boxes by room, shelf, and label. He made copies in town at a print shop 2 counties over where no one knew his name. He mailed sealed packets by certified mail to a state historical archive, a university land use law clinic, a retired attorney he had once helped after a car accident, and a reporter in Billings known for stories that made public officials uncomfortable. He told no one more than necessary. Still, word began to move. In small towns, silence travels almost as fast as gossip. Marcy at the diner started saving him the corner booth. Clara Whitcomb brought an old photo album that had belonged to her husband. A retired surveyor named Pete Alvarez arrived one evening with a cigar box full of field notes he claimed he had been meaning to throw away for 20 years. A former school board secretary mailed him copies of meeting minutes that mentioned the memorial grove before it disappeared from official plans. Each person carried one small piece. None had been enough alone. Together, they formed a shape no one could ignore. Then Victor Langford came to the jail. He arrived on a bright afternoon in a black SUV with two men in suits and shoes too clean for the access road. William was replacing a plywood panel over a broken window when the vehicle stopped in the yard. Ghost stood at once and moved to William's side. Victor Langford stepped out first. He was in his late 70s, tall, silver-haired, and expensively dressed in the effortless way of men who never have to check price tags. His smile looked practiced enough to survive a funeral or a bank closing. "Mr. Mercer," he called. "I was hoping we might talk." William set down the hammer. "Then talk." Langford glanced at Ghost. The smile tightened slightly. "Privately, perhaps. Ghost hears better than I do." One of the suited men frowned, but Langford lifted a hand. "I understand you have taken an interest in old county records," Langford said. "Somebody had to. This property is unsafe. Records stored here may be damaged, incomplete, or misleading. You could unintentionally create confusion for families who have already suffered enough." William studied him. "That your concern? Family suffering?" Langford's eyes cooled. "My concern is accuracy." "Then you will be glad the state archivists are reviewing the originals." For the first time, the practiced smile disappeared. Only for a second. Then it returned. "You have no idea what you are involving yourself in." William took a step closer. Ghost moved with him. "I spent half my life being sent into places where powerful men thought consequences were for other people," William said quietly. "So maybe I have some idea." Langford looked toward the building, then back at him. "The past is complicated." "No," William said. "People make it complicated when the simple version makes them look guilty." The two suited men shifted, but Ghost gave a low sound from his chest, not a bark, not a threat exactly, but a reminder that loyalty sometimes has teeth. Langford's jaw tightened. "This town has benefited from my family's investments for decades." "Maybe it has," William said. "And maybe it paid for them before anyone knew the bill." Langford said nothing for a long moment. Then he turned and got back into the SUV. Before leaving, he lowered the window. "Be careful, Mr. Mercer. Old buildings collapse." William looked at the jail, then at Ghost. "So do old lies," he said. The SUV drove away in a cloud of dust. 2 days later, the reporter from Billings arrived. Her name was Dana Ruiz. She wore jeans, hiking boots, and the expression of someone who had learned to distrust official smiles. She spent 6 hours at the jail, photographing documents, recording William's account, and comparing what he had found with copies already mailed to her newsroom. "This is bigger than a local land dispute," she said near dusk. William leaned against the booking desk. "How big?" "Big enough that people will deny it before they understand it." "Can you prove it?" Dana looked at the boxes. "Not all of it yet, but enough to start asking questions people won't enjoy answering." The story ran the following Sunday. It did not accuse wildly. It did what Harold Finch had done. It laid out facts. It showed original maps beside later altered records. It named the East River Recreation Project and the families who had donated land. It described the hidden archive beneath the jail and the former county clerk who had preserved evidence when official files vanished. By Monday morning, the county announced a formal review. By Tuesday, the state attorney general's office requested records. By Wednesday, news vans were parked outside a building the town had spent 40 years pretending not to see. William hated the attention. Ghost tolerated it better, especially when camera crews came with snacks. But the most important visitors were not reporters. They were residents. They came slowly at first, 1 or 2 at a time. Older people who remembered fundraisers for the river park. Men who had played Little League on temporary fields because the promised ball diamonds never came. Women whose parents had donated land and died believing the project simply ran out of money. Veterans who had heard rumors of a memorial grove and thought maybe they had imagined it. They brought photos, letters, receipts, newspaper clippings, and memories. Some were angry. Most were simply quiet. One evening, a man named Thomas Reed arrived after the reporters had left. He was in his 80s, with a cane and a face folded by years of weather and work. He stood in the old corridor looking at a photograph of the planned river park. "My father signed over 2 acres, he said. "Best land we had near the water." He said children needed places to run more than old men needed fences. William stood beside him. Thomas touched the glass over the photograph. He died thinking he had been stupid. The words struck William harder than anger would have. He was not stupid, William said. Thomas nodded, but his eyes shone. I know that now. That was when William began to understand what the records truly offered. Not revenge. Not even justice in the clean way people wanted justice to work. Many of the men involved were dead. Some legal windows had closed. Some property could never be returned without hurting people who had bought it later in good faith. But truth still mattered. Truth could reach backward and remove shame from the wrong shoulders. It could tell a dead father he had not been foolish. It could tell a widow her husband had not imagined danger. It could tell a town that forgetting was not the same as healing. Months passed. Spring gave way to summer, and the jail changed with it. At first, William only meant to secure the building so the records would not be damaged. Volunteers arrived with plywood, tools, paint, coffee, and opinions. A contractor repaired the roof at cost. The high school shop teacher brought students to replace broken trim. Marcy organized lunches. Clara sat in a folding chair near the entrance and told everyone they were holding the broom wrong. William protested until protesting became pointless. The town had decided the jail belonged to them again. Not legally. Legally, it belonged to William. But in the deeper way that places belong to memory, it was becoming shared ground. The holding cells were cleaned and turned into small exhibits. One showed the history of the building. Another displayed copies of the East River maps. The booking room became a reading room with long tables, labeled binders, and photographs donated by residents. The hidden archive was sealed behind climate-controlled glass after preservation experts finished their work, accessible only by appointment, but visible enough for school children to press their noses close and whisper about secret rooms. The smaller vault held Harold Finch's recorder. Beside it, William placed a transcript of the final statement. He refused to let anyone call the place the Mercer Museum. After weeks of arguing, the town council approved a better name, the East River Memory Center. William attended the vote only because Clara threatened to drag him there by his bad shoulder. When the motion passed unanimously, people clapped. William looked down at his hands until Ghost nudged his knee beneath the chair. Outside, Dana Ruiz asked him why he cared so much about a building everyone else had wanted to forget. William looked toward the old jail, its windows glowing in the evening light. Because somebody spent 40 years protecting the truth, he said. The least I could do was listen. The quote appeared in newspapers across the state. His daughter called 3 days later. For a moment, when her name lit his phone, William nearly let it ring. Pride is a lonely thing, and he had been living with it long enough to mistake it for shelter. But Ghost lifted his head, as if reminding him that doors did not open themselves. William answered. Hi, Dad, she said. Her voice was smaller than he remembered. Hi, Sarah. Silence stretched between them, full of all the messages unanswered, all the birthdays reduced to texts, all the grief neither of them had known how to carry after Ellen died. I saw the article, she said. Which one? There is more than one. Despite everything, he smiled. Apparently. She breathed out. Dad, I am sorry. He closed his eyes. The words were not enough to fix what had broken, but they were enough to begin. I was angry after Mom, Sarah continued. At everything. At you because you were still here. At myself because I did not know how to help. Then when you started losing things, I told myself you were pushing everyone away. Maybe I was the one stepping back. William looked through the restored window at Ghost lying in the sun. I did some stepping back too, he said. I would like to come visit. His throat tightened. Ghost will expect treats. Sarah laughed through tears. I can handle that. She came in August with her teenage son, Eli, whom William had not seen in nearly 3 years. Eli was taller than expected, awkward in the way of boys who have outgrown their limbs, but not their shyness. He stood outside the jail holding a backpack and staring at Ghost with open wonder. Is he really a military dog? Eli asked. Retired, William said. Do not let him tell you otherwise. Ghost accepted the boy after a thorough inspection and half a turkey sandwich. Sarah walked through the exhibits slowly. She paused at Harold Finch's letter, at the River Park maps, at photographs of families who had trusted promises made in public rooms. Then she looked at her father as if seeing not a ruined old man, but someone still capable of building something from wreckage. I did not know you were this lonely, she said later, while Eli helped Ghost chase a tennis ball in the yard. William watched the boy laugh. I did not exactly advertise it. No, she said softly. You never did. He wanted to say it was fine. He wanted to make it easy for her. That had been his habit as a father. Carry pain quietly so his children would not have to feel the weight of it. But truth had become the center of his life now, and truth deserved better than old habits. It hurt, he said. Sarah's eyes filled. I know. They stood side by side in the evening light, not repaired, not fully, but no longer pretending the cracks were not there. That was enough for one day. The formal investigation took longer than the news cycle cared to wait. It confirmed what Harold Finch had documented. Public records had been altered or removed. Several transactions violated disclosure rules that existed even then. Langford Development denied wrongdoing, blamed deceased employees and outdated practices, and eventually agreed to fund a public restitution trust without admitting liability. People argued about whether that was justice. William did not pretend to know, but the trust paid for something the town had been promised decades earlier. By the following spring, work began along the river, not on the full park once imagined. Time had changed too much for that. Some land was gone. Some was privately owned. Some had become protected habitat. But enough remained for walking trails, picnic tables, a small playground, and a grove of young cottonwoods planted around a stone memorial honoring local veterans and the families who donated land in good faith. At the dedication, Thomas Reed arrived in a wheelchair pushed by his granddaughter. Clara came wearing a blue dress and Ray's old deputy badge pinned inside her jacket. Marcy brought enough pie to feed a county fair. Sarah stood beside William, and Eli held Ghost's leash with solemn pride, though everyone knew Ghost was the one escorting him. A county official gave a speech. A state historian gave another. William listened politely and remembered why he disliked speeches. Then Clara stepped to the microphone. She was not scheduled to speak, which made everyone nervous except Ghost. My husband used to say the old jail knew more than the courthouse, she said. For years I thought that was a sad thing. Now I think maybe it was a hopeful thing. Because buildings do not forget unless people let them. And because one stubborn man and one very stubborn dog decided to listen, we get to remember together. People applauded. William looked away before anyone could see what her words did to him. After the ceremony, he walked with Ghost down the new trail toward the river. The cottonwoods were young, their leaves bright and trembling in the breeze. Children ran ahead toward the playground. Families unfolded blankets near the picnic tables. An old veteran stood before the memorial stone with his cap in his hands. The river moved quietly beyond them, catching sunlight in broken pieces. Sarah came to stand beside him. Mom would have loved this, she said. William nodded. Ellen would have brought flowers. She would have known every volunteer's name by lunch. She would have told William his shirt was wrinkled and then held his hand so no one would notice him pretending not to cry. She would have liked that Ghost got famous, he said. Sarah laughed. She always said that dog had better manners than most people. Ghost, hearing his name, leaned against William's leg. The familiar weight steadied him. That evening, after everyone left and the sun lowered behind the prairie, William returned to the old jail. The building was quiet now, but not lonely. Lights glowed warmly inside the reading room. The restored windows reflected the sky. The chain-link fence was gone. Wildflowers grew where rusted wire had once curled through weeds. Ghost climbed the front steps slowly, his age showing more on tired days. William noticed. He noticed everything about Ghost now. The extra pause before standing, the way his muzzle had gone almost white, the deep sleep that came after long afternoons with children and visitors. Getting old, partner, William said. Ghost looked back at him as if the statement applied to both of them. Fair enough. They sat together on the front steps. A year earlier, William had sat in nearly the same place holding a folder of documents and wondering whether he had uncovered a burden too heavy for one man. Before that, he had been a widower with unpaid bills, an estranged family, a truck full of belongings, and a dog who refused to let him disappear completely. He had thought the jail was shelter. Then he thought it was a mystery. Then evidence. Then responsibility. Only now did he understand that it had also been an invitation. An invitation to step back into the world. To let people help. To admit that being abandoned and feeling abandoned were not always the same thing. To believe that even late in life, a man could still become useful, not because he was strong enough to carry everything alone, but because he finally stopped trying. Ghost rested his head on William's knee. William scratched behind the old dog's ears. You knew, didn't you? Ghost's tail thumped once against the wooden step. William smiled. The prairie stretched in front of them, wide and gold beneath the last light. Somewhere in town, families were talking about history at dinner tables. Somewhere along the river, young trees were taking root. Somewhere in a county archive, Harold Finch's careful handwriting was being preserved under glass instead of hidden in the dark. And here, at the edge of town, an old jail no one wanted had become a place people entered with respect. William thought of the auction, the laughter, the rain, the $6 bid that had made him look foolish to everyone watching. He thought of all the things people mistake for worthless because they are broken, old, inconvenient, or covered in dust. Buildings, records, promises, men. He looked down at Ghost, whose eyes were half closed in the evening calm. The jail had never really been the purchase. The purchase was a second chance, not the kind that arrives clean and shining, wrapped in comfort and applause. The real kind. The kind that comes disguised as a burden, a risk, a rusted door, a lonely night, a truth no one wants to touch. The kind that asks whether you are still willing to open something the world has given up on. William leaned back and watched the final edge of sunlight slip beyond the horizon. For the first time in years, he did not count what he had lost. He counted what had remained. A daughter willing to come home. A grandson learning his name. A town learning its own. A purpose strong enough to wake him before dawn. And a loyal dog who had walked beside him through war, grief, silence, and finally into a forgotten jail where the truth was waiting under concrete. And the memory of Ellen, no longer sharp enough to wound him every morning, but warm enough to remind him that love, when it is real, does not disappear just because life changes shape. It becomes a voice inside you, telling you to keep going when the road looks empty. As darkness settled gently across the prairie, William rested his hand on Ghost's head and understood something simple enough to feel like grace. Sometimes hope does not knock loudly. Sometimes it waits in a place everyone else avoids. Sometimes it costs $6. And sometimes, when the whole world walks away, loyalty is the only light brave enough to lead you back through the door.